Those who are demanding a separate state peacefully are the same as terrorists. Nnamdi Kanu was convicted of incitement, not actual terrorism, incitement to terrorism. Why is Gumi not sat in a jail cell somewhere today for excusing, inciting, explaining, rationalizing?
There will never be peace in Nigeria if the Tinubu government refuse or fail to negotiate with the bandit.
Sowore and Dele Ferro to me now one of the fearless people we will get for this country and honest people we will get for this country. This man don't come tell Tinubu for in face. In fact, waiting in tell Tinubu on this particular video, they fear they even they catch me, make they know arrest this man because the way the country they go, anybody will talk against the president and they don't arrest them. So make God protect this man. Waiting this man talk about Nigeria and their lawlessness. In fact, watch this video from the starting to the end. Hear from yourself within this man talk. Share this video to everyone on every social media platform so that they go see waiting they go on, so that they go they at a lot of waiting won't happen. Share this video and drop your opinion at the comment section. Whatever you think, drop it at the comment section. Don't forget to click the subscribe button for more updates.
We are now going to be attacking the politicians and the military. It is my turn to become the Nigeria president, and nobody can stop me. Nigeria is a sovereign nation that belongs to us. Donald Trump has no right to come and attack our Nigeria brothers. And nobody can stop me from becoming the Nigeria president 2027. Tinubu doesn't have the capacity to make Nigeria a better country. Bandits are also our brothers that we need to talk with calmly. And the Nigeria government has to negotiate with them and then give them what they want to end the killing and abductions that are going on in our beloved country, Nigeria. There will never be peace in Nigeria if the Tinubu government refuse or fail to negotiate with the bandit, because they are fighting for their right. It will be worse than as it is right now if Donald Trump attacked the bandit. So let's solve our problems now that we can. Thank you.
You to crystallize what I believe could be a peaceful revolution in Nigeria, brought about because you, as a collective, desired something better than our realities. I want to speak to us about the subject: Nigeria, the rise of the neo-feudal state. First thing first, so that we may all have the capacity to, at least let me seek to enhance our capacity to understand the subject by some basic definitions and explanations. I said Nigeria, the rise of the neo-feudal state. What is it that I really want to talk to you about? But I think the best way to proceed is to start with the Anlon's razor. The Anlon's razor, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is the principle that says that you should never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Let me repeat myself. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. When I look to the objective reality of my country, Nigeria, when I consider that a country that was battered essentially in 1960, if we're going to use that arbitrary cut of point, a country that was battered at that time is still incapable of generating electricity. If you use the Anlon's razor, you will easily be misled into believing that it is the stupidity of those who have ruined Nigeria that accounts for the inability to produce energy in Nigeria. But that will be an error. Stupidity does not explain our objective reality. And malice can only barely or partially explain this. So over the years, as I have seen things that do not add up in the Nigerian space, I have pondered issues, I've researched our history, and I realized that what is happening today is that the Nigeria that you imagine that you live in does not really exist. So this morning, I want to speak to us, as I have said, about the rise of the feudal state. So Nigeria, you already know, there is no need to define it. It's essentially an enterprise that does not exist for the benefit of those who consider themselves citizens when they are in fact serfs. So first thing first, what is a feudal state? A feudal state is one where you have multiple layers of citizenship, quote and unquote, or if you will, membership, where the law does not rule. Because if the law should rule, you would have equality before the law. And equality before the law will suggest that everybody get treated the same. This is incompatible with a feudal state. So Nigeria is essentially a state with multiple levels of membership and multiple levels or systems of justice or administration of injustice, if you will. But we didn't get to where we are by accident. There is a historic origin for where we are. The Yorubas have a proverb. They say, if a child does not live to witness history, then he must at least be the beneficiary of oral history. And that history is the father of all history. I, on the other hand, I benefited from divinely failing my JAMB exam multiple times. So I had to read government and history multiple times. So I was forced to study the history of Nigeria. In my time in secondary school, we were taught the constitutional development of Nigeria. That meant you had to learn constitutional history. So by the time I was in the university, before I even got into the university, having learned A-level government, I had become something of a prodigy when it came to constitutional history of Nigeria. So I know what I'm talking about. Before the coming of the British, because this is where we must go to find the origins. Before the coming of the British in what you generally refer to as northern Nigeria today, we had the Kanem Bonu Empire, and you had the Sokoto Caliphate. Long before the Sokoto Caliphate, you had the Hausa kings. Some of you would have learned elementary history where they would have taught you about the Abe kings and the Bokoi. But whatever that is, important thing is that before there was a Sokoto Caliphate, there were independent Hausa states. These independent Hausa states were loosely, maybe like you can refer to them as something of a confederacy, but the most important thing you must understand is that these were kingdoms, pretty much like Yorubas had kingdoms, preeminent ones being the Oyo Empire. The important thing is that before the British came, we were governed by systems. Northern Nigeria was largely governed by feudalism. The Yoruba kings were not absolute monarchs. Their powers were limited. And we had systems of checks and balances. So they didn't have the same kind of power that the Sokoto Caliphate, the caliphs, the Shehu of Borno, for instance, had. Those were absolute monarchs. But because they ran theocracies, which lent itself more readily to the feudal system, you had highly systemized feudal states in northern Nigeria. By the time the British came, you already know the story of indirect rule. They took what was the most successful governance model existing in a space and layered their sovereignty on top of that so that they didn't have to deploy so much human resource. So here is what happened. By the time the British came, even the parts of the north that had not been conquered by any of the Islamic kingdoms were brought under the sovereignty of the Islamic empires. So you had a situation where kingdoms and ethnic groups in most part of the northwest, the north central, the northeast, which went with the Shehu of Borno, what you essentially had was a situation where the lesser kingdoms, the smaller kingdoms were brought under centralized authority where you had the native authority and all of that. Important thing is that feudalism ruled essentially in the north propped up by the British. In the Southwest, in what was once the West, in the West, you had Yoruba monarchs with limited powers, and you had decades of a civil war in Yoruba land. It was very easy to just lump everybody under the Halafin. He was the preeminent Yoruba ruler, but he was not ruling everybody. There were independent kingdoms that had broken away from Oyo control. But because it was convenient for the British, everybody came back again under the Oyo. Promoted the Oni as the spiritual head, promoted the Oyo, the Alafin of Oyo, as the sovereign in Yoruba land. And of course, he was the one who signed all the pre-colonization papers, the treaties and all of that, where we were supposed to have been traded away to the British crown. Important thing is this: the Europeans, particularly Lord Lugard, felt comfortable with denying citizenship, note it, to those that they brought under their rule. All they had to do was deal with those they've recognized as sovereign over the people, and this formed the foundation of the feudal state that we have today. Because unlike other countries, where states were started with the supremacy of citizenship or evolved, if you look at European history, you'd find that feudalism was part and parcel of what was already in the place. But citizenship evolved, came out of the serfs as the Bill of Rights was signed, as the Magna Carta was signed, as the French Revolution happened, as the Habsburg Empire was broken. Different events, the 1917 revolution in Russia, different events led to the emergence of citizenship and the rule of law in Europe. America took it a step further when it declared the universal equality of all men, fought a civil war, and predicated a country on the back of citizenship. That was the apogee of the idea of citizenship, even though it emerged out of ancient Rome. The important thing I'm trying to do is lay the theoretical foundation so that you begin to understand clearly that there is a world of difference between being called a citizen and being citizens. There is also a world of difference between declaring a country to be democratic and it being in reality a feudal state. Now, our feudal state has its root in our colonial history. But it was always up to us. It was always up to us to either embrace this feudalism or to nod it off. So here is what happened. At the beginning of Nigeria, those who founded Nigeria, those who called the founding fathers, particularly Awolowo, was painfully aware of the fact that feudalism threatened to overtake the country. And I'll show you. One of the first things that you must note when the feudal state is in flow is that it weaponizes poverty and it weaponizes ignorance. It is not to the advantage of rulers of feudal states to allow the people the knowledge to discern their correct state. It would always seek to make them stupid, either by the use of religion, religious rulers whom they always collaborate with or own. So you have a situation where Awolowo looked at this and he felt that the antidote will be weaponized knowledge. That is what informed the free education policy in Western Nigeria. If you doubt me, revert to the letter quoted in extensio in an article by Egbola Asisi Olagunju last week. There is a letter, I recalled it after reading it on his page, where Chief Bola Ige and my friend Shola Ogun, who is watching this broadcast, I've seen him a couple of times, will recall there was a letter we received as from one student, 1978-79 session. We had paid school fees before Uncle Bola was sworn in, but we received a full refund of our fees after we had been given books. And then when we were now going to Form 2, we got a letter which reminded us of the need to preserve the textbooks we had used so that the subsequent here, the students coming behind us would be able to use the same. He then reminded us that the opponents of the UPN were not happy with the idea of a knowledge-based populace, and that this was what the UPN saw as the antidote to feudalism. So as far back as 1978-79, as far back as the 60s, in fact, from 1954, when self-government came into the Western region, those who governed in the West understood the need to ensure that the people had sufficient knowledge to be able to resist the forces of feudalism. So there was a concerted effort in the Western region to build educational institutions and to make education universally available, because an educated mind is unamenable to slavery and will not be accepting of second-class membership, because you cannot have second-class citizenship. It's membership of a state. So you have a situation where back in the 1960s, smack bang in the 1970s, there was clarity as to what was required to be done to avoid the feudalization of Nigeria. Witness today, education has become a luxury that cannot be afforded by governments across Western Nigeria. And when they have offered it, how qualitative has it been? But Awolowo sparked other people into action. At this time, the Eastern region, because of the healthy rivalry, followed suit. They too began to offer education, maybe not quite understanding the ideological foundation for it in the Southwest, because it became a commitment of leadership to educate the people. Now, how weaponized knowledge? Nigeria was not always amenable to feudalism. In the eastern part of Nigeria, the one part which had little or nothing to do with monarchies before the coming of the British, where they had to create warrant chiefs, aberration of custom, embraced feudalism by far quicker than any other part. That is what explained the multiple alliances that were found with the feudal north between Azikiwe. But this is not the day to be pointing fingers. Let me now remind you. The Middle Belt, that later became complicit in the erection of feudalism, were one of the first people to resist feudalism, because they were the first victims and original victims of feudal empires. They were the slave stock for the slave trading Islamic empires of Kanem Borno and the Sokoto Caliphate. The most important commodity for both were slaves. And the people they refused to Islamize were the persons they could enslave. So by design, these people were not Islamized, but were treated essentially as slave stock. During the planting season, they ensure that when you come out to plant, they will catch you. They had garrisons, places like Cotton Cafe, places like Lafia. Those were Fulani garrisons in the Middle Belt. Those are what became Emirates by the time the British came. The important thing is this: there was a consciousness by the first victims of feudalism to fight feudalism in the new Nigerian state. That is what accounted for the Willings Commission of Inquiry, the fears of the minority, and that was what accounted for the entrenchment of the original Bill of Rights in the 1960 Independence Constitution. You had the TV riots. You had the Jos riot of 1945, caused by British policies of exclusion, where Igbos were targeted in Jos by the Hausas. The important thing I'm pointing out to you is that the Nigeria you see today is the result of multiple accidents and a child of multiple lies that have been battered. Yes, there was a post-independence detente where the North, quote and unquote, and I mean the original feudal states, kept itself to the North. But when its hold on federal power was threatened by the TV revolt of 1962 and the general disenchantment with his rule, the NPC rule in northern Nigeria, which would mean that they were not going to be able to muster enough votes to retain power in the 1960, I think that would be the 1964 election now, not too sure, or in the election that would determine power at the federal level. They found easy alliance with Akintola. That was the beginning of the crisis in the Western region, because the Western region was required to offset the loss of the Middle Belt to the North, quote and unquote. That's to the force of feudalism. The point is this: the original hegemons in Nigeria pre-1966 was Indigo. The people who first spread across Nigeria and took advantage of the colonial reach was Indigo. And that was what engendered the resentment that led to the 1966 war. Yes, it began with the January coup. It crystallized with the July counter coup. But you must understand this: nature abhors vacuums. Every country grows on the back of hegemonies. American civilization grew on the back of hegemonies. The British civilization grew on the back of an hegemony, and Nigeria was no different. The overarching hegemony in Nigeria pre-independence was Indigo hegemony. They were the ones spread across the length and breadth of Nigeria, and this is what had attracted enmity and envy as far back as 1945. The only importance of this is so that you understand that the feudal hegemony did not just step into a space that was empty. That space became emptied as a result of the issues that began on January 15, 1966, crystallized in July 1966, and led to the Civil War. The force that won the Civil War, the hegemony that emerged out of the Civil War, was the hegemony that had always been the most useful to the original owners of Nigeria, the British. This hegemony was encouraged, was entrenched. That hegemony produced the 1979 Constitution, the one that clearly went against the decision of the Constituent Assembly that had recommended a return to parliamentary rule. It forced American-style presidential system on us. You would understand where I'm going with this in a few minutes. Just come with me. That hegemony created a Nigeria that in its mind is unbreakable, but it is also a Nigeria that is not advantageous to its victims. Without the people's will, the 1979 Constitution collapsed within 4 years. But this Constitution that collapsed within 4 years became the model by which Abdusalami Abubakar produced another Constitution labeled produced Decree 24, labeled the 1999 Constitution. And the 1999 Constitution is the encapsulation of the wet dreams of those who have desired feudalism as the governing factor in Nigeria. It concentrated a lot of power in the hands of the president. It essentially makes the president, if the truth be told, the Sultan of Nigeria. He has so much powers. He appoints the judiciary, essentially. He appoints the police. He appoints everybody in the army. He is the chief appointer of everybody. He can direct the EFCC to any purpose. Malami, who thought he was invincible, has just been shown how visible he is. But this was not in pursuit of any altruism. is simply in pursuit of naked power. It is not by accident that you are seeing governors across party lines jumping into the APC. It is not by accident that you are hearing judges singing out they are standing on his mandate. It is not by accident that you have the religious clerics falling over themselves in adulation of evil. These are not by accident. These are systemic responses programmed because the state has been designed to be feudal. Now, what is, or shall I say, what are the clear evidences of feudalism? Who is a citizen? A citizen is a person protected by law within a state. He bears responsibilities and he has obligations, but he also has rights. But the most important marker of citizenship is that he is a subject of law. He is governed by law, but he is also protected by law. If you're an American citizen were to die, an inquest will be demanded. Cannot be buried without an autopsy if it was in a violent environment or situation. He is a law-protected individual. And because of the protections of the law, account must always be given for his life. But in Nigeria, by public acknowledgement and judicial confirmation, 430 Shia Muslims were murdered by Buratai's security detail in Zaria. If they were citizens, somebody would have had to account for their death, their killing, the murder, but nobody ever accounted. It's very easy, quite easy, to point at Buratai, especially since most of us don't even like Buhari. I never liked him. But let's talk about a model of democratic governance, General Olusegun Obasanjo. Within a year of his installation in office, the OD accident happened. OD accident, euphemism for OD murders. By government acknowledgement, 40 persons died. And I must note, they added the qualifier, only 40 persons died. But in reality, over 2,000 Nigerians were murdered in OD. Over 2,000 by the Nigerian state. A state that is not governed by law, that is above a citizen. The entire machinery of the state is directed towards regime protection and preservation, not citizens' preservation or protection. That is why you can find the president's son having enough soldiers to take over Republic of Benin when they can't even spare some for Yelawata. That is a feudal state. That clearly is a feudal state. The Nigerian feudal state grew during the years of the military interregnum, was more or less calcified by the time the military were the ones who were giving us constitutions. So we moved from military dictatorship to civilian dictatorship, and it has always taken the temperament of the occupiers of the office to reveal exactly what we are. What we have become, and what should be evident to each and every one of us by now, is that Nigeria has become a feudal state where the rulers have no respect, regard for those they are ruling. If you doubt it, let me show you. And that's why the Hanlon Racer example is very important. There are times when you must look beyond stupidity to explain the malicious actions of persons. The Nigerian state is unapologetically feudal. Citizens, quote unquote, would be seized by terrorists, credibly attributed to the government. Terrorists allegedly imported into the country by the persons occupying the highest level of governance in Nigeria today. They would abduct victims. And you would hear presidential spokespersons talking about phone calls instead of, they'll be telling you kinetic, non-kinetic, making excuses for the misery of those they rule. You have almost 30 million, and I've been advised that this is what it is. You have over 30 million Nigerian children strolling on the street, no school, no education, nothing. This does not occupy the mind or attention of those who purport to rule the country, but they are able to borrow money to send people to Hajj. Think about that. They can borrow money to send people to Hajj, something that is meant to be voluntary if you can afford it. A government that is constitutionally charged to educate its citizens, victims, would borrow money to send people to Mecca, but they cannot borrow money to build schools. In Lagos State, remember, this is the fourth largest economy in Africa, Lagos State. Forget the rest of Nigeria. Lagos State is unable to provide adequate educational facilities to the residents of the state. These are not things you blame on stupidity. These are deliberate and intentional. So the question is it born of malice? No, it's not malice, it's business. If you are educated, you become a threat to the system. So it has nothing to do with malice. It's not malice. And it's not stupidity. It's deliberate. Obasanjo and Atiku spent $16 billion, not naira, dollars, $16 billion on electricity. And this country is still in darkness. Nobody is in prison on account of it. Nobody. And you think that is born of stupidity? Malice, yes, but the malice is intentional. It's designed to achieve something. You are meant to stay poor, because if you are constantly fighting to survive, you are not likely to demand more. That is a feudal state. It weaponizes poverty, it weaponizes ignorance, and you see the worst effect of religion in feudal states. Feudal states control the religious establishment. How is Nigeria any different? You find pastors confessing to things that will make a carnal person like me blush. Even I would be scared to admit to half of the things that you hear your pastors boasting about. You see a pastor open his gob to tell you that Saul must come before David. They are admitting to the evil that they are endorsing, but they are explaining why that evil must come first. It's not isolated. All of them. You hear Gumi excusing evil, bringing false moral equivalencies. So the freedom fighters of IPOB are the same as the Fulani terrorists and kidnappers. Those who are demanding a separate state peacefully are the same as terrorists. Nnamdi Kanu was convicted of incitement. Incitement, not actual terrorism. Incitement to terrorism. Why is Gumi not sat in a jail cell somewhere today for excusing, inciting, explaining, rationalizing terrorism? Why? Look, in feudal states, one of the first things that you must understand that happens is that all the powers of the state are fused in the feudal lord. On his mandate, they have two judges have sung. Judges are singing it. On his mandate, they are standing. They are singing it in your Congress of Baboons. What you have as senators who say they are children of your first lady. You heard Wike by his own mouth admitting to how he compromised the judiciary in relation to the Osun local government funds. It had been whispered multiple times about how Wike stands in the forefront of the corruption of the Nigerian judiciary. But he himself came out into the open space to acknowledge, admit, and flaunt it in his field with the Osun State person. And we are all still sat lying to ourselves that we are a democracy. A democracy where not only are your choices constrained, let me show you one. The Supreme Court delivered a judgment that essentially said that Abure's term as the chairman of the Labour Party had come to an end. And then Nenadi Usman went multiple times. I think Peter Obi also went to INEC. INEC refused to implement the judgment. But when Peter Obi crossed to ADC, INEC recovered his senses and then stopped recognizing Abure. Where is the judiciary? In the pocket of those on whose mandate, stolen mandate, they're standing. That is where the judiciary is. In a feudal state, when the feudal lord does not get what he wants, he takes it anyway. So in spite of the fact that the legislative arm will do exactly as it is told most of the times by those who have run Nigeria, it still wasn't enough. They took one legislation before the parliament. They didn't get all the things they wanted in that legislation. They wrote one for themselves. Anyway, forgery is a way of life. Forgery that is forced on them because what should be absolute control of the legislature for some reason was not completely absolute. So now they had to write one for themselves. Me and you, we lie to ourselves that it is the aggregation of our sovereignty that form the state. Between your tax authorities and Bulaba, they've taken that sovereignty and handed it to France. Everybody is running away from France. They had to forge a legislation in order to hand our tax revenue to France. In a feudal state, accountability does not matter. It is the political convenience of the rulers that matter. So even though we're in an environment where we are being told that because the government requires our taxes before it could do many things, we should also look away whilst it does a lot of things. Well, let me ask a question. Who pays for the criminalities that have been used as justification for the hardship that have been forced on the Nigerian people? Subsidy is gone. Subsidy is gone because of multiple scams in the subsidy regime. Who has paid for these crimes? How many people have paid for the billions that were stolen under the subsidy regime? How many people? I was in prison with persons who stole goats. There were persons in the cell with me who stole yam. Where are the persons who stole the Commonwealth and forced all of us to have to swallow the bitter pill of subsidy is gone? There is something they called ways and means by which they printed trillions of naira. And because of these trillions of naira that were printed paper, the real money in my pocket and yours became worthless because they had printed papers. The only person I see being thrown around from one court to the other is Emefiele. But was it only Emefiele that did the stealing? Who are the beneficiaries of this crime? Who has paid for it? Me and you are paying. We're paying by the devaluation of our currency. This is probably the only country in the world where you spend money to buy your own currency because you can't even find it in the market, in the bank, no, where they don't have any cash. Simply because some people stole all of us blind. But if it is stealing, because this is where the Anglon razor rule comes up again. You say if it's not the only thing that I can explain by stupidity, I should not attribute it to malice. No problem. How do you explain this way and mean story? How do you explain it? Am I supposed to believe that it is stupidity that has allowed them to keep quiet whilst all of us have been impoverished? Am I supposed to ignore the fact that members of this current government were beneficiaries of that stealing? It's the same party. There is no victimless crime. This is a crime that has rendered every Nigerian a victim, and yet nobody is paying. I was in this country when Adisirika took $3 billion for his year Nigerian scam. Who has paid for it? This is because some people must be above the law. And it's a mutual affirmation society. A convict is the deputy chief whip of your Senate. A convict, a convicted thief, a thief, but is above the law. They had to find a lacuna. He said the person who read the sentence had already been elevated to the Court of Appeal. How convenient. A retrial was ordered, but never happened. For someone like me, who committed no crime, and could be quickly railroaded into a prison cell because we are in a feudal republic. The Nigerian state has become a feudal republic. Completely feudal, devoid of conscience, unrestrained by law. And we continue to lie to ourselves that it is anything but. The Nigerian state has been restructured into a feudal state. The Fulani virus of feudalism has jumped host. What once used to be a social construct within Fulani culture has crossed across Nigeria. None of your governors are accountable to you. It is only a function of temperament that you have people like Alex Oti doing anything worthy of note. Mr. Pointer in Lagos State, his 8 years will soon be done. They are busy painting roads. Because functionally, the governors are emirs. Your president is the sultan. Regardless of the part of Nigeria, feudalism reigns supreme. And if you ever doubted it, think again. Something has to explain where we are. And you cannot explain it by either malice or stupidity. Let me qualify that. Neither explains it alone. There is a system. The system works to a desired outcome. And everything you see happening is happening because it was designed like that. Nigeria is not where it is by accident. There's no separation of power in Nigeria today. And the president of Nigeria, note this, the character of the person in the office shapes the perception of power. The same office that was occupied by Yaradua, who was restrained, even though he acknowledged that he got into office via a stolen mandate, is the same office that Bulaba is occupying today. They used power much differently. The same office was the one occupied by Jonathan. It is only in a feudal state that you see the things happening in Nigeria happen.
Why are you still fighting the struggle to have independence for Biafra?
We are fighting for independence, not fighting physically with guns and bullets. We are fighting in terms of our agitation. We are fighting in terms of our belief. We're fighting in terms of our consistency to ensure that we are free, because we're not free. As a free people, we can afford to make life better for our people. Right now, we can't do that because of how Nigeria is structured and because of the very flawed foundations upon which Nigeria rests.
You called for a referendum latest this year, November, you said, I think.
Yes.
If that doesn't happen, what's the way forward? Because the way it looks like the government will definitely not agree to that.
Then there'll be no elections in Biafra land. No more elections here. They can put whoever they like in office. They can do whatever they like with their political positions. We will not engage in any political process.
You said it's a peaceful struggle, but
yes.
There are some videos of you appearing in the past, especially abroad, in particular in one conference in the US, where you said you need weapons to defend yourself, you need guns and ammunition. How can we understand that in the context that you're saying it's a peaceful struggle?
I'm sure you've heard about the Fulani headsmen killing people all over the place. Have you heard about it? Of course. Exactly. So how do you intend to defend yourself against Fulani headsmen without guns and bullets? They'll be killing our people, raping our women, destroying crops in the farms, and no one does anything about it. Is that how human beings are supposed to live?
So, and you have the right to arm yourself and defend yourself with arms in that context?
Self-defense is recognized even by all the known laws of the UN. Is that not correct? We have the right. If somebody were to barge into this very interview now wielding a machete or an AK-47, are you suggesting we should let them get away with it?
You were detained for almost 2 years, from 2015 on, and actually there was no trial. No trial ever happened, and despite several court rulings that said you were supposed to be released, you were not released.
Yes.
Do you think you were treated in a fair way by the government? Or rather also by the justice system?
No, not fairly, because Nigeria is not a civilized country. People behave like animals. They are not reasonable enough. They're not disciplined enough. They are not mentally developed enough to run a transparent civil society. For them, they have a feudal mindset where you have the ruling class and, a multitude of poverty-stricken people who never utters any word in rebellion or to even ask questions about their plight. That is one thing we are determined to challenge.
Don't you think you insult a lot of Nigerians with that?
I'm being very kind, to be honest. I could have used far more harsher words to describe them. I'm being very kind.
So generally you don't think very positive of your countrymen then, obviously?
They are not... When you say positive, no, as individuals, perhaps there are a few good people amongst them. But as a collective, this is an absolute mess. And you can see for yourself. Didn't you go through the roads and see how horrible they are? Didn't you see how unkempt everywhere is? How filthy and dirty everywhere is? That is the product of a Nigerian system that is uniquely backwards, even by the very third world standards of Black Africa. That's the fact, and people must face up to it.
Well, I traveled in the north quite extensively, and I went to very remote areas sometimes where you would still find Igbo people living there, peaceful together with communities in the north. Don't you sometimes think that you might endanger their peaceful coexistence with the communities there, that they might get into trouble with that?
So if they're living so peacefully together, or cohabiting so peacefully as you put it, how come you hear about all those uprisings in the north where southern Christians are being slaughtered and nothing gets done about it? Are you telling me that that is normal? People are in the north out of a dire need, necessity more or less, to try and survive. Because here, the entire production process has been emasculated by people and policies that are geared towards ensuring that our people exist in perpetual state of poverty. And that is unacceptable to us. What we're asking the world to recognize is that we want to live in peace, not in pieces. We want to live in peace just to allow us to be. Allow Biafra to exist. We were existing before the British came. Just allow us to go back to, what we were before. No African came to Europe to create countries. So for somebody to just come in here and say, you from today, your name is Nigeria, is simply laughable.